127 days. Completely alone in the Arctic. Pilot Sarah Morrison had stopped counting the days because she no longer believed in rescue. But by day 27, she had learned to survive by eating her own equipment. The catastrophe began on February 3, 2018, when Captain Sarah Morrison's C-130 Hercules transport aircraft encountered a massive Arctic storm while delivering supplies to a remote research station in northern Alaska. At 31 years old, Sarah had logged over 2,000 hours flying in extreme weather conditions, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for the meteorological nightmare that would change her life forever. Sarah's military career had taken her to challenging environments around the world, from desert combat zones to high-altitude mountain operations. Her expertise in cold-weather flying had made her the Air Force's go-to pilot for Arctic missions, including supply runs to isolated research facilities and emergency evacuations from weather stations. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? The supply mission to Barrow Research Station was supposed to be routine, despite the harsh February weather conditions. Sarah's cargo included medical supplies, communication equipment, and emergency provisions for researchers studying climate change effects in the Arctic Circle. The flight plan called for a simple delivery and immediate return to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage. Weather reports had indicated challenging but manageable conditions along the flight route. Arctic storms were common in February, but Sarah's experience flying in similar conditions gave mission planners confidence that the delivery could be completed safely despite the marginal weather forecasts. The storm system that intercepted Sarah's aircraft was unprecedented in its intensity and scope. Meteorologists later classified it as a once-in-a-century weather event that combined multiple Arctic storm fronts into a massive system covering thousands of square miles, with winds exceeding 150 miles per hour and temperatures dropping below -60 degrees Fahrenheit. The first indication of trouble came when Sarah's weather radar began showing storm cells that appeared larger and more intense than the forecast had predicted. Within minutes, the aircraft was buffeted by wind shears that exceeded the structural limits of even the robust C-30 design, forcing Sarah to deviate from her planned route. Navigation became impossible as the storm's electromagnetic effects disrupted GPS systems and radio communications simultaneously. Sarah found herself flying blind in conditions that made instrument navigation unreliable, while dealing with mechanical stresses that threatened to tear the aircraft apart in midair. The emergency landing was more of a controlled crash, as Sarah fought to maintain aircraft control while searching for any flat terrain in the endless expanse of frozen wilderness below. With engines failing and control surfaces damaged by ice buildup, she had perhaps 30 seconds to find a landing site that wouldn't kill her instantly. The impact scattered debris across a quarter-mile of frozen tundra as the C-30 broke apart on contact with the unforgiving Arctic landscape. Sarah survived the crash only because her pilot's seat remained intact within a section of fuselage that slid to a stop against a natural windbreak formed by ice formations. Consciousness returned slowly as Sarah awakened to the sound of howling wind and the realization that she was trapped inside a broken aircraft in the middle of nowhere. Her initial survey revealed multiple injuries, including a dislocated shoulder, possible concussion, and severe bruising that made movement painful and difficult. The wreckage offered minimal shelter from the Arctic elements, but Sarah quickly realized that staying with the aircraft remains was her only chance for survival. The cargo area contained supplies that could sustain her temporarily, but she faced the immediate challenge of treating her injuries while organizing resources for long-term survival. Communication equipment had been destroyed in the crash, eliminating any possibility of calling for rescue. Sarah's emergency locator beacon appeared damaged beyond repair, and the storm conditions would have made aerial search operations impossible even if rescue teams had known her approximate location. The first week tested Sarah's survival training as she struggled to create livable conditions within the wreckage while dealing with injuries that limited her mobility and effectiveness. She improvised heating using materials from the aircraft while carefully rationing the limited food supplies from her emergency pack. Medical supplies from the research station cargo allowed Sarah to treat her injuries using equipment intended for the Arctic researchers. She managed to relocate her dislocated shoulder and treat cuts and bruises that could have become infected without proper care in the harsh conditions. Water wasn't immediately a problem since she could melt snow and ice, but finding fuel for heating presented ongoing challenges. Sarah learned to burn materials from the aircraft interior, including seat cushions, insulation, and eventually wooden crates from the cargo hold. Food rationing became critical as Sarah realized that rescue might not come quickly. Her emergency supplies were designed for short-term survival, not extended isolation. She calculated that even with strict rationing, her food would last perhaps 3 weeks under optimal conditions. The psychological challenges of isolation began affecting Sarah's mental state within days of the crash. The constant howling of Arctic winds, combined with the uncertainty about rescue and the physical discomfort of living in damaged aircraft wreckage, created stress levels that threatened her decision-making abilities. Week 2 brought new challenges as Sarah's initial food supplies dwindled, despite careful rationing. She began exploring the possibility of finding nutrition in materials that weren't traditionally considered food, starting with leather items that could potentially provide calories and essential nutrients. The decision to eat non-food items wasn't made lightly. Sarah's survival training had included information about emergency nutrition, but actually consuming aircraft materials required overcoming psychological barriers and physical disgust that made the process extremely difficult. Leather seat covers became her first experiment in unconventional nutrition. Sarah discovered that by boiling leather in melted snow, she could create a broth that provided some caloric value while being digestible enough to avoid serious gastrointestinal problems. The process of preparing leather for consumption required careful attention to removing dyes, chemicals, and other potentially toxic substances. Sarah used techniques learned during survival training to clean and prepare materials that would normally be considered inedible or even dangerous. Plastic components from the aircraft interior presented different challenges. While some plastics could be made digestible through careful preparation, others contained chemicals that could cause serious illness or death. Sarah had to learn to identify safe materials through trial and error that could have been fatal. Week 4 marked a turning point as Sarah developed systematic methods for extracting nutrition from aircraft components. She created a prioritized list of materials based on their potential caloric value and digestibility, starting with organic materials and progressing to synthetic alternatives. The psychological adaptation to eating unusual materials was as challenging as the physical aspects. Sarah had to overcome learned revulsion and cultural taboos about consuming things that weren't food while maintaining the mental discipline necessary for careful preparation and consumption. Fabric materials offered another source of potential nutrition. Sarah discovered that cotton and wool fabrics could be processed into digestible forms, though the caloric value was minimal, and the preparation required significant energy expenditure that sometimes exceeded the nutritional benefit. Month 2 brought the realization that rescue was unlikely to come soon. Weather conditions had prevented any systematic search efforts, and Sarah's location in the vast Arctic wilderness made accidental discovery nearly impossible. She had to accept that survival would require months rather than weeks. The development of a sustainable routine became essential for long-term survival. Sarah established daily schedules for food preparation, shelter maintenance, physical exercise, and psychological activities that would help maintain her sanity during extended isolation. Innovation in material preparation techniques allowed Sarah to extract more nutrition from available resources. She learned to ferment organic materials to break down complex compounds into more digestible forms, though the process required careful attention to prevent dangerous bacterial growth. The creation of tools from aircraft debris enabled more efficient resource utilization. Sarah fashioned cutting implements, containers, and processing equipment that made material preparation easier and more effective while conserving her physical energy for essential survival activities. Winter deepened the challenges as temperatures dropped even further and daylight hours diminished to just a few minutes per day. Sarah had to adapt her survival strategies to cope with near-total darkness and cold that made even simple tasks extraordinarily difficult. Month 3 tested the limits of human adaptability as Sarah's body began showing signs of malnutrition despite her innovative approaches to finding calories. Weight loss, muscle deterioration, and cognitive effects made survival activities increasingly difficult while requiring greater innovation and determination. The psychological effects of extended isolation manifested in various ways, including hallucinations, depression, and periods of irrational thinking that threatened Sarah's ability to make sound survival decisions. She developed mental exercises and routines designed to maintain cognitive function under extreme stress. Experimentation with metal components revealed that some aircraft metals could provide essential minerals when prepared correctly. Sarah learned to create mineral supplements by carefully processing small amounts of appropriate metals, though the process required extreme caution to avoid poisoning. The discovery that wood components could be processed into digestible cellulose provided a renewable source of calories that helped sustain Sarah through the worst periods of food shortage. Though the nutritional value was limited, it provided essential bulk and some caloric content. Month 4 brought signs that Sarah's unconventional survival methods were working. Despite extreme weight loss and physical weakness, she had maintained basic cognitive function and avoided serious illness that could have been fatal in her isolated condition. The development of advanced material processing techniques allowed Sarah to extract maximum nutrition from increasingly unlikely sources. She learned to break down complex synthetic materials into components that could provide some nutritional value while avoiding toxic substances. Spring's arrival brought both hope and new challenges. Warmer temperatures made survival easier in some ways, but also created problems with food preservation and increased activity by Arctic wildlife that could pose threats to someone in Sarah's weakened condition. Day 100 marked a psychological milestone as Sarah realized she had survived longer in Arctic conditions than most experts believed possible. Her innovations in finding nutrition from non-traditional sources had sustained her through the worst winter conditions while maintaining enough physical strength to continue survival activities. The preparation techniques Sarah had developed became increasingly sophisticated as she learned to combine different materials to create more balanced nutrition. She discovered that mixing various aircraft components could provide better overall nutritional profiles than consuming individual materials. Communication attempts continued despite the lack of working equipment. Sarah created visual signals using aircraft debris and reflective materials, though the remote location made detection by passing aircraft unlikely. The activity provided psychological benefits even when practical results were minimal. Physical conditioning became crucial for maintaining strength and mobility during extended malnutrition. Sarah developed exercise routines that could be performed within the confined space of her shelter while conserving energy for essential survival activities. Month 5 challenged Sarah's innovations as she exhausted the most easily processed materials and had to develop techniques for utilizing increasingly difficult resources. The learning curve required constant experimentation while avoiding potentially fatal mistakes in material selection or preparation. The psychological adaptation to extreme isolation reached new levels as Sarah learned to find satisfaction and meaning in the daily routines of survival. Her mental state stabilized around the acceptance that rescue would come eventually, but couldn't be relied upon for immediate survival. Day 12, 120 brought the realization that Sarah had achieved something unprecedented in Arctic survival. Her techniques for extracting nutrition from aircraft materials had sustained her through conditions that would have killed most people within weeks of the initial crash. The systematic documentation of survival techniques became important for Sarah's psychological health and potential future value. She began keeping detailed records of material preparation methods, nutritional effects, and lessons learned that could benefit future survival situations. Seasonal changes provided new opportunities as spring vegetation began appearing in areas where snow had melted. Sarah supplemented her equipment-based nutrition with traditional forage foods that provided essential vitamins and minerals her improvised diet had been lacking. The combination of traditional and innovative survival techniques created a comprehensive approach that addressed both immediate survival needs and long-term health requirements. Sarah's experience demonstrated that human adaptability could overcome seemingly impossible challenges through creativity and determination. Day 2027 arrived with Sarah in remarkably good condition, considering her ordeal. Her weight loss was severe, but she had avoided serious illness and maintained cognitive function through innovations that redefined the possibilities of Arctic survival. The rescue came suddenly when a geological survey aircraft spotted the unusual debris pattern that marked Sarah's crash site. The pilot's decision to investigate the anomaly led to the discovery of one of the most remarkable survival stories in Arctic exploration history. Sarah's physical condition upon rescue amazed medical professionals who couldn't initially understand how she had survived so long in conditions that should have been fatal. Her explanations of eating aircraft materials seemed impossible until detailed examination confirmed her innovative survival methods. The debriefing process revealed the extent of Sarah's innovations in emergency nutrition and survival techniques. Her methods for processing non-traditional materials into digestible substances provided valuable insights for future survival training and emergency preparedness programs. Medical examination showed that despite extreme malnutrition, Sarah had avoided serious organ damage and maintained relatively stable health through her careful approach to alternative nutrition sources. Her survival demonstrated human adaptability under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The psychological evaluation revealed remarkable mental resilience despite 27 days of complete isolation under life-threatening conditions. Sarah's ability to maintain cognitive function while developing complex survival innovations provided insights into human psychological adaptation to extreme stress. Recovery required months of careful medical supervision as Sarah's digestive system readjusted to normal food and her body regained strength lost during the Arctic ordeal. The transition from survival mode to normal life presented its own challenges that required professional support. The military investigation of Sarah's survival techniques led to changes in Arctic survival training that incorporated lessons learned from her experience. Her innovations in emergency nutrition became part of advanced survival curricula for personnel who might face extended isolation. Sarah's story became a classified case study in human survival capabilities that influenced emergency preparedness protocols and survival equipment design. Her techniques for extracting nutrition from unlikely sources provided new approaches to emergency situations where traditional survival methods were insufficient. The aircraft debris that had served as Sarah's home and food source for 27 days was carefully examined by survival experts who documented her innovations for future reference. The site became a testament to human ingenuity and determination under impossible circumstances. Years later, Sarah returned to flying but with a new perspective on survival and human adaptability. Her experience had demonstrated that the limits of human endurance were far beyond what most people believed possible when creativity and determination were applied to survival challenges. The 27 days that Sarah Morrison spent alone in the Arctic, sustaining herself by eating her own aircraft, represented one of the most extraordinary survival achievements in modern history. Her innovations had redefined what was possible when human creativity was applied to the fundamental challenge of staying alive against impossible odds. Her story inspired survival specialists around the world who recognized that traditional approaches to emergency situations might not be sufficient when facing extreme conditions. Sarah's techniques provided new possibilities for survival that could save lives in situations where conventional methods would fail. The equipment that Sarah had consumed during her 27-day ordeal had literally become part of her survival story, transformed from aircraft components into the nutrition that kept her alive. Her achievement demonstrated that survival sometimes required thinking beyond traditional boundaries and finding life in the most unlikely places.